I need to admit. So let's start this in a few seconds.
Okay.
So today we are bringing to you Sorsha Runarius again. I need to say that the last interview was one of the most viewed interviews on this channel so far. If you
Oh,
the amount of time it was on the air. So yeah, interview was pretty good, and today we will simply continue the same subject and we will discuss the jinn in a really great detail. And also I will make some connections and digressions to the Hindu pantheon. So thank you, Sorsha, for joining us again, and nice to have you on the show.
thank you so much, Demetrius. It's always fun to be here. I really enjoyed our last chat, our last podcast. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah. So essentially, last time we talked about jinn, and essentially the thing you mentioned, which was really interesting to me, and I contemplated it a lot, is your dreams. So you dreamed about burning tornadoes in a desert landscape, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And so I will make a little digression to the Quranic verses depicting the jinn. So it is said that the humans are made out of clay and water, while jinn are made out of smokeless fire. But there is also an obscure hadith mentioning that the in creation of the jinn, one other astral matter participated, and that astral matter was described as a scorched wind. So essentially, if you combine those two reports together, what you get is that the jinn as a being is a form of etheric energetic creation, which is made out of something which can only be described as a spinning smokeless fire. So in reality, all of those descriptions we have of jinn in different grimoires are unrealistic because jinn as a creature lives under completely different conditions in a completely different aspect of reality, and it doesn't have any resemblance of what we would consider a physical form. And there is, I tried to explain this to the person before. So there is like a big confusion in the occult community regarding quote unquote aspects of different spirits. So, for example, let's say you summon Lilith, and one time Lilith appears to you as a woman with big breasts and tail, and another time she appears as a spider. And so people tend to say this is a spider aspect of Lilith, or this is a mother aspect of Lilith, or this is Saturnian aspect of Lilith. And I tended to make the same mistake. But the reality is there are no different aspects of Lilith. There is only one Lilith. She only takes different forms depending on a circumstance in order to show certain message to me as an observer. Reality is that she doesn't have any form. She is that etheric matter. She is what can only be described as a smokeless fire. However, the phrase smokeless fire isn't a reference to the physical fire, it's a metaphor. So if you observe on the astral plane entities, how you see them is like a ever moving etheric matter, which is like tingling in a way. So to an observer, if you want to make a metaphor of anything physical, it really looks like a smokeless fire of certain color, which kind of makes the entire text make sense.
I find it a really,
Because we need to keep in mind that, yeah, you wanted to say something.
oh, there's a little bit of lag, I think, through the internet. And sometimes it would be a little choppy, but you know, I think that, that's a really good point that you make because, these spirits will often convey a lot of different messages and meaning through the forms that they take. Rather than it just being like an aspect that people perceive, it's just, they have like their core essence, which is like one essence, and they have different things to teach, perhaps based on the circumstance or the understanding of the magician or person working with them. Um, I find that, the tornado of fire or the smokeless fire kind of aspect of them is kind of a unified theme, like with many different spirits. But for jinn in particular, they are just very, it speaks to their essence. It speaks to their essence and how they just, they will interact with humanity in ways that we can perceive and understand. And so we might perceive them having different attributes or characteristics. But I always would encourage people, go deeper and look at the deeper meaning behind that aspect, behind that appearance, to get further gnosis into their deeper essence.
Yeah.
Does that
So
make sense?
essentially, I kind of today also had a discussion with a guy. So there was like a Hindu guy, and he kind of calls me every day and simply asks me questions. And I don't charge him anything because he asks me so many questions that he forces me to think outside of the box just to reply to him. And so today he kind of asked a really interesting question to me. And the question was like, we on the left-hand path use destructive operations a lot. We tend to focus on destructive side of things, while people on different spiritual paths, they focus on different aspects of the universe. And so there is like that social stigma regarding the destruction you do. But really, if you observe from the point of view of supreme divine, right, of what Hindus call the Brahman or Allah or whatever, the supreme divine created both. So to the supreme divine, it's literally irrelevant what kind of energy you use. It's only human interaction. It's only human social conditioning, which conditioned us to essentially value one more than the other because we are centered in our own survival in this biological form. But if you look from the perspective outside of this physical plane, in certain circumstances, we are bound to destruction and creation have equal value. And so you killing somebody and you healing somebody is equally valuable. You, for example, healed individual in a profound manner, in a really impressive way, and you shared that healing instance with the audience. What you shown during the last interview is something majority of practitioners cannot pull off. But fundamentally, the power you use is in essence extremely destructive. The void represents on its own accord the destructive observation of the Supreme. And what I also found out is that there is no light and the void. There is only one Supreme Source. But because we observe the world differently, when we come into contact with the Source, we essentially observe it in a different way. So somebody will see Supreme as the void, or somebody else will see Supreme as the light. But he is observing the same thing and then adapting that observation to his own vocabulary. Because if you see the descriptions of the void and descriptions of the light in those respected textual scriptures, you pretty much find out that those are two different terms for the same thing. So essentially, what I see a lot of the time in occult discourse is they consider merging with the void to be essentially going away from the light, but they don't understand that the light and the void are one and the same thing. And therefore, it's like saying, I am running away from the water to dive into the sea. And so I think that we really kind of need to stop using labels and start analyzing what's actually in there. So what's your kind of experience regarding the jinn? What is their origin?
Well, I guess, depending on the tradition or the source material that one would look at, I mean, there's a lot of interesting myths and stories around the jinn, I mean, from what I can see and what I've observed, they seem to be something that, they're not, of this world. They come through from elsewhere. They come through from that kind of primordial resonance, if you will. Very primal, very, wherever they're from, whatever they are perceived, they are creatures of action, and intent. I find that, I mean, we as humans, we like to classify things. We like to classify things. We like to give things structure. But jinn don't necessarily have a set structure until we perceive it. It's kind of like, Schrodinger's cat, is it dead or alive? And you don't know until the moment that you look. With jinn, it can be kind of, Schrodinger's jinn. They may not have a form until the moment that you call them up and look at them and perceive their energy. But what is consistent is that fiery nature, and we perceive it as maybe a fire, but going beyond the fire, it's that, a fire is both creative and destructive, and so too are the jinn. I mean, a lot has been written about the jinn, being, some people consider them as, entities that have hatred for humanity and they will only partner with us if it suits their agenda. I find that not necessarily to be the case. I find that, they work very well with people. They just need like a channel in which to operate. It's like they're pure electricity. You know, you're dealing with like this raw, pure power. And if you don't direct it, certainly it can be destructive in your own life. And I think that's where a lot of the mythos um, has come about, because a lot of times people will call up a lot of power and then not really direct it. And fuckery and chaos will happen in their own life, let alone whatever result that they were trying to get while working with Jen. Um, I find working with Jen, it's best to just, bring the energy in. And then I've noticed that they don't really stay around to have lengthy conversations, like some other infernal entities, demons, angels might have more of a human type of conversation where there's dialogue, there's, you know, that kind of gnosis happening. With Jan, anytime that I've called them up into my space, it's like I have a sense of them being there and manifesting, and then immediately getting to the point and doing, getting to work. Like, get out of my way and let me get to work. They don't really need to be told what to do, because your intent should be so infused with your will and the intent of the working, that they kind of come more as a formality, that you kind of can like acknowledge them, and then they get immediately to work. They don't stay around and talk much, from what I've seen.
So essentially, you noticed one pretty interesting point, which I have to praise here. Because one of the few people who are actually willing to admit how destructive spirits can be are actually you. So you never hide in any of your writings, nor any of your posts, nor any of your material you ever publish, how destructive spirits can be and how detrimental to the mental health of the practitioner spiritual work can be. Now, when I am talking about being detrimental, I am talking about being detrimental in a bad way. I am not talking about progressive pressure for the sake of evolution. You are always pretty clear that work with spirits is dangerous and it can kill you, destroy you mentally, make you crazy, destroy your health, etc. And essentially, I need to say and elaborate why that's the case. I tried to elaborate it in the last podcast, but I failed because we had many different subjects, and now this is like a specifically with you genic undertaking, because outside of Esben Kane, you are the only person with enough experience and open mind to talk about this. So essentially, the jinn are made of what we can describe as smokeless fire. When we talk about the jinn in this community, the type of the jinn which are mostly referred to are the shayateen, the servants of Ibliss. And so when I asked them specifically why is their presence so detrimental to humans, they kind of explained me this. So there is like a source of all creation, and that source has a spectrum of energies it emanates. And so you have white light and you have black light. In essence, there is no difference between those two things. They are one and the same thing, but the density and the spectrum are different. And the black light corresponds to more destructive aspects, while white light corresponds to more creative aspects. And one needs to be logical enough to understand that both of those phenomena, both of those spiritual manifestations, are essentially the same thing. There is no white light against black light dichotomy. It doesn't exist in reality. It's one spiral with two opposite ends. And so shayateen correspond to the black light, to extremely dark and extremely black part of that spectrum. And obviously, when that energy manifests in the astral space, it works like a nuclear reactor. I can only describe the phenomena as astral radiation, right? But you observed human auras, and you know that majority of human auras are extreme polarity of the white light. Majority of people, when you look at them, they have certain colors of the light spectrum. And so the colors of the light spectrum we possess are simply too fragile to withstand the astral radiation of the shayateen
That's a really good point because
in the astral space. So what happens as a result?
I was just
Okay.
going to interject. In some ways, we can think of Jinn almost like being like nuclear radiation. If you pick up a piece of uranium or plutonium, without it being encased in something, it can make you very sick. Radiation poisoning. Jinn are very much like radiation because of how they vibrate, and it's not always compatible with human life and our biology. Yet you can do great things with radiation. You can destroy cancer as well. You can use the same piece of plutonium to give cancer or destroy cancer depending on how it is infused in the equipment and how it is directed. And it's not that, it's bad for our biology, it simply vibrates in a way. The reason that we get cancer with certain radiations is because it causes your cells to multiply and divide more rapidly than your body can really process or handle. And so it will manifest as tumors. And it's only really considered, cancerous when they are kind of in the wrong spot and they're just out of control, then we call it cancer. So when we equate that to how the Jinn might manifest in our energy and in our life, it can be very destructive. And when I say that, I mean, you can direct it to destruct other things. But in my own life, when I have worked with Jen, like it was some of the most intensely destructive periods that I've gone through. I had very traumatic losses in my life, people, friendships dissolving. And I wondered why. And I've noticed this with Jen. I've also noticed this while working a lot with Belial as well. And it's just, if you're not willing to sacrifice the things or the people that hold you back willingly and timely, when you're working with these forces, it will do it for you. And it's usually more catastrophic and traumatic if you don't do it yourself. If you're willing to hold things within you, like the resonance of something holding you back, just working with these spirits, whether intentionally or not, you might be calling them up for something entirely unrelated to this other little chain that you have in your life, that needs to be broken. But as a result of working with them, that will get broken too. And if you're not ready for it or you don't understand that, it can be an emotionally traumatic thing. Um, I found that to be true while working with Jen. And I think that's why a lot of people avoid working with Jen, because most people are not ready and willing to lose everything and to have to, rebuild everything. Because sometimes that's what it takes. You have to destroy something and be annihilated before you can rebuild. And most people, that's out of a lot of people's comfort zones, I would say.
Yeah. And you are like free to talk whenever you wish and whatever you wish. Like, don't try Like here's the thing, like whatever you say on this podcast, it will be appreciated. And you are one of the people who cannot like say a bad thing because you have so much experience in so many different areas.
Well,
And
thanks.
like I need to say this to give you a little confidence boost, but it's a fact that you have been practicing this a little bit longer than I have
Hang
been
on just a
alive.
second.
And
You're
and
frozen.
that's like uh
What
I hear
happened?
you. I don't know, do you hear me by the way?
Demetrius, are you there?
Yeah, I am.
Uh,
Are you
It
there?
froze for like a good 30 seconds.
Yeah, but like what I wanted to say is you have been practicing this a little bit longer than I have been alive, and so you have a lot of things to say, and I am really proud to have you on a podcast. But what I wanted to say here, to add a little bit more, is that jinn are the type of entity, shayateen are type of entity you cannot and should not summon without preparation. Because a lot of people call shaitan or shaitanic related entities without preparing. And I can statistically say that the percentage of people who become irreversibly crippled through work with them is about 2/3.
Hmm.
And I am talking about people who summon them to do something for them. I am not talking about the people who were targets of the certain operations. I'm talking about people who summon them to get something done. And the reason for such an absurd rate of backlash is people don't understand that the spirits they are summoning are type of biological organism, unseen biological organism, and that there is nothing fictitious in them. There are real and tangible consequences for interacting with them. And essentially, what happens most of the time is they literally summon a spiritual equivalent of wild predatory animal in their space. And obviously that animal does what it usually does, which is feeding off prey, and those people get irreversibly destroyed. So I have been discussing with multiple individuals how to prepare for work with them. What is your take?
Well, considering I find that, my offerings to Jinn are very different often than offerings like to demons. I I have indeed used my own blood in Jinn rituals as well. Just for that link. Um, but it's like grabbing a tiger by the tail. How much do you really want to pull it before it's going to turn around and react to that? So I find that, okay, so if I usually when I am calling up a jinn, something for that kind of energy, it's usually for something really painful and destructive. I'll usually have a target in mind, and I will partner with this jinn to wreak havoc in somebody's life, usually. Um, in addition to the target that is being focused upon with that kind of force, I will often like the target can be both. I mean, they are the target, but they are also the offering on some level. Because if a jinn will, feed off of, energy, I would rather them feed off of the energy of the target. So not only are they going to just destroy circumstances and fortune and somebody's reputation, I mean, they can do all kinds of destructive things that, and physical. Um, I will often like dedicate and sacrifice part of that person, usually to the jinn. So then they are free to not only feed on that person, I mean, destroy them in any way that it needs to manifest, but also that person is the offering, is the fattened calf for the jinn. Um, I find it works very well to approach it that way because it's kind of a two for one. They seem very satisfied because then their destructive tendencies just go rampant in the life of the target. And, there are, I mean, I'll still sometimes offer, wine or sweetbreads or fine cheeses, just depending on kind of the type of spirit. I'll offer different things, but I will offer the essence of a target or multiple people to fuel a ritual to go after one person if need be, you know. Um, Not just, people, but perhaps human conditions. There's a lot of things going on in the world that can be kind of tied into the ritual so that the spirits are well fed and satiated and respected and honored, and you know they're inclined to do what they do best if they're well fed and happy about it, you know letting them be the creatures that they are without restraint.
Yeah. So essentially, I need to add that we don't support massacring of people at random, and we also are not responsible for whatever you do with this information. We are simply putting this out for educational purposes. I needed to give this disclaimer because
Yes, yes, yes,
people,
the disclaimer. Yes, we do not condone, physically going out and murdering people, okay? But spiritual murder is totally fine. If you want to, spiritually offer somebody, if they, this is what we call fuck around and find out. They have volunteered as tribute, okay? And they're going to be the snack. They're going to be the offering to these spirits to then go forth and cause devastation. I find that, like, okay, the Book of Smokeless Fire by S. Ben Kane, for example, is filled with all kinds of interesting spirits that have all kinds of things that they are known to be good for, based upon, his work and the work that he called upon to even create that book, based on an older Solomonic text. Um, I find, though, that the descriptions are more symbolic. I mean, they can be taken at face value literally, but, for instance, I think mamas, um, yeah, like mamas, Mahamas. There's different ways to kind of pronounce them, however you resonate their names. But, one of his attributes is just, causing all kinds of destruction and like choking a victim. Well, that could be handy if you really do want to, like, strangle somebody spiritually. You might be inclined to send a spirit like that after them. However, other ones are described as, causing spontaneous abortions. And, you know, that might seem very dark and twisty on one hand, but look at the spiritual implication, and look at the deeper meaning of slaying children. Okay, it doesn't have to be literal children, because that might be distasteful for some people. Um, but consider it as like aborting creativity, their ideas. So you're not necessarily literally trying to cause spontaneous miscarriages and abortions in people. I mean, some people might want to, but I found it more beneficial to look at the deeper meaning behind the descriptions and say, okay, if they're known for like breaking a neck and strangling, and okay, well, that's like, you know, disconnecting your thoughts from the rest of your experience, cutting you off from your own creative flow, you know, making it where, your projects will not be born, will not manifest into this world. And that's kind of how I take those descriptions as I look for the deeper meanings. And I found a lot more room to work with these spirits coming at it from that because, at first glance, you read a book like that and it seems pretty dark and twisty when, you think, well, man, you're wanting to like gut babies. Well, no, not really. I want to perhaps gut somebody's creative flow if they're a problem, you know, if that makes sense.
yeah, it does. The reason why I have difficulties breathing right now is because we are kind of talking about them. They are here, and you kind of can already feel them. And so when they are here intensely, they can create certain little tweaks with your body, kind of. And that's what I'm kind of feeling with you and also with myself. But I am not trying to comment negatively on anything you say. I wanted to add one experience of mine, which is pretty good illustration of your point. So about 3 years ago, I called Zobogan or Zubagan, depending on how you pronounce it. He's like one of the most notorious spirits in there. He is one of the two entities who is listed as Ibliss's son in the book, and Shara is Ibliss's daughter. And then you have Ibliss himself. So the Zobogan is essentially a spirit with whom, out of all spirits in the book, I developed the closest relationship. And he is listed as a spirit who comes and breaks people's necks, preferably in their sleep. But when I summoned him for alchemical transformation, as stupid as it was. And what happened is he literally took an astral hand, put his finger in my throat center, infused it with some kind of fire or flame, and I couldn't speak. I was completely incapable of normally speaking. My throat was suffocating, and then he simply disappeared. And so that example showed me that essentially what is written in a text is simply introduction to something much deeper, because those beings seem so. I'm sorry for like giving constant digressions, but
Looks like it froze again.
So yeah, do you like
Dang,
hear me?
electronic fuckery.
Yeah,
I don't know if it's
like
frozen for you, but it's frozen for me.
I hear you. So when you start hearing me again, just tell me so
I can hear you again. You're
essentially.
unfrozen.
Okay, so what I wanted to say is this. So one of the few things Muhammad forbid when he became a prophet is he forbid the casual poetry. He forbid the poetry of the masses, essentially. There was only one poet who was allowed to compose, and that was one of his companions. And he was like all about Allah and stuff, but everybody else was forbidden from composing. And the reason why that was the case is because old Arabs believed that the poetry comes from the jinn. Now, in pre-Islamic Arabia, the perception of the jinn was much different, but they had the same belief. And so it is logical that the jinn would then use poetic language to describe themselves. So what you see in the books as their depictions is literally a poetic verse which describes what they can do on many levels. And for example, when I summoned Shara for the first time, it was one of the most dramatic experiences ever. So the Shara description is she is a woman with two ravens on her shoulders, whispering to men and driving them insane. And so I called Shara up, and then she told me, I wish to connect to your heart. And I was like, okay. And what happened then was I had so crazy heart arrhythmias and difficulties breathing that I got afraid for my life. And I essentially started having panic attacks. But it was really physiological in nature. It wasn't occasional panic attack you would have. It was simply ridiculously crazy. So I had to summon Lilith to help me to take control of the situation. And so let's look at Shara's depiction or description from this point of view. So Shara is said to cause whispers in the eyes of young men or in the ears of young men, driving them insane. So think logically, what makes young men specifically the most insane out of all things? Obviously, love towards the opposite gender. So what would then be Shara's description? So she is forcefully possessing people with intense feeling of love, which are so intense by nature that they cannot manifest because there is a limit to which female can respond to emotion, and beyond that limit it becomes a traumatic experience. It doesn't matter do you love person back or not. If emotion is too intense, it's chaos, it's lunacy. So what Shara is doing in that context is she's using emotion of young men to destroy them from within and driving them insane with whispers of that never-ending loop of passionate romantic obsession. And that's kind of what happened to me in a few seconds. I went for like all four stages of the thing. And those two experiences kind of really taught me how those spirits describe themselves. And it taught me actually that they possess complexity beyond our understanding. So you say, and you clearly said in your speech, that there is no way to politely placate the Shayati. You need to give them something to eat. You cannot, how to say, you cannot essentially pet them and make them to be nice because you give them nice gestures. It doesn't work for them this way. They are seeing what they are getting exclusively in a matter of how much life force it is. So I think that's a really useful advice. Do you have some other advice regarding them to share?
You know, I would say, while working with Jen, pay attention to your dreams. You know, I started, kind of meditating on the ideas of Jen, and then I started having really intense dreams of fiery tornadoes. And then they would manifest physically. I'd be driving down. I live kind of outside of town, so there's a lot of farmland and big open fields. And I'd see, we call them like little dust devils, the little mini cyclones that aren't like really destructive, but it's like wind that'll pick up sagebrush and dirt, and you can see them. But there were a lot more things of that nature manifesting like in my geographical area. When I was working with Jen, I would see it in the fields, in my yard. It'd be a perfectly clear, calm day, and then the wind would pick up, in the trees outside. So, pay attention to your surroundings, but then your dreams, you might dream of all kinds of things. But one thing that I have found, I had a series of dreams regarding Jen and how I know in our last podcast we talked about, everybody kind of has like a guardian or a patron, demon and angel. I think that the same is true for Jen because like I encountered this Jen energy in a dream, and it was, it manifested as a male form, and I merged with it in this dream, and it was like I was resisting it. I was like, no, 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 no. And it was just, but it was like the draw was there. It was like this, I don't know, it's like we held arms and our tattoos merged. It's like he had tattoos and I had tattoos on the inside, but when I touched him, they manifested all over my skin. And so my skin was covered like with these really ornate like tattoos. Not specific like spirit sigils, but they were like a spiritual fingerprint unique to that spirit. And it infused me with this. And so I and it's different, this is not a spirit that I have read from like in the Book of Smokeless Fire. It wasn't like a name that came to me out of that. It was just a different form of Jinn energy. But I think that we also have Jinn with us to some extent, outside of the times that we might summon them and evoke them. And just, I don't know, I tend to get downloaded with a lot of information where I'll just get pictures in my head of scenarios and things playing out. And I saw it as, there's like this fiery essence near us, and it's just when we put our attention to it, it will coalesce and manifest in our lives. So we have to learn how to recognize and I guess learn the gnosis of that, learn the lesson there, learn how to connect with that spirit that is with us as well, that I believe is a jinn type of spirit.
Yeah, it's called essentially Karin in the Arabic tradition. It's a form of shadow twin, like a genic entity which is fused to our soul at birth, and that entity feeds off our own negative energy. And it's essentially not independent spirit. It's partially independent, but it's also a part of us. And that's exactly
And that's
what
what
you
it felt like.
described.
That's what it felt like in the dream. It was like I was perceiving it as a separate spirit, but it was something that I could not get away from. I couldn't, it was something that was a part of me. It was outside, manifesting outside of myself, but it was still a part of me. And I was like kind of acknowledging it in the dream, even though I was consciously resisting it in the dream. But during that time of my life, I was having to do a lot of soul searching and introspection and a lot of deep, shadow type of work, and making a lot of decisions that affected the course of my life during that season of life. Um, it's interesting when you start working with them. I mean, a lot of things will shift in your life, and some of it may be perceived as negative. Um, and there were a lot of hard lessons that I had to learn, a lot of loss, but it still made me stronger. And I learned more and I gained more than I lost eventually. But at the time, it just felt like a lot of destruction happening.
Yeah. But essentially, I never read Into the Crucible. That's the book of Esben Kane I never read. I read Black Book of Azathoth. I read Book of Smokeless Fire. I read his collected works, but I never read Into the Crucible. Can you talk a little bit about Into the Crucible from your point of view?
Um, I've not actually read the entire book yet, Into the Crucible, so I can't really speak much on it. I mean, I know that we, I don't know, as magicians have a lot that we can work with out here. I think I've seen a couple other gin books as well. I can't recall the authors off the top of my head, but I've seen it in my Facebook feed. I've seen it, some sort of a gin, book pop up now and then, and I can't recall the author, but I was definitely wanting to check out, some other works to see some other perspectives. But um, from what I understand with Into the Crucible, and at the time, right before he actually was finished writing it, from what I understand, like the first book, it was, a season of life that alchemized him, to put it out there. I mean, he always had, talked about, everybody was excited about, the second, sequel to Smokeless Fire. Um, so because I've not entirely read the book, I can't really comment much on Into the Crucible, but I'm sure it's definitely in the same vein as Smokeless Fire and probably a good read. Um, I should probably get around to reading it at some point.
Yeah, but like, I have one interesting anecdote to share. Because like we are like sharing anecdotes here because essentially teaching people how to practically summon the shayateen is too risky. I don't want to be responsible for 10 deaths, and majority of those 10 deaths would be the deaths of the summoners. So yeah, essentially once I summoned King Paimon, and King Paimon told me that I need to study baneful magic, and so Paimon usually comes in a really composed manner. She comes in a form of a camel. She has a face of young guy. On a camel, she is really well composed, in nice garments, usually Arabic Middle Eastern clothing. But in that specific moment, Paimon literally started to melt. And below the face of the young boy he usually takes, because he usually takes a face of something between man and a boy, like an elderly teenager or something. The face started to melt, and Below that boy face, what I saw was the most exhausted elderly face I have ever seen, with burning fiery eyes, and his body started to melt. And then he kind of tried to explain to me in a great detail that the jinn we summon are actually mortal beings. They are not immortal, and so they need life force to feed off in the same way we need food. And then he kind of explained to me how their biology operates, that they have, despite of the fact that they are like not having physical bodies and forms, that they are just energy, they have something which we will describe as technology. However, the word technology is too limiting to describe what they actually have. So he kind of melted, he turned into a cloud of smoke, and then he showed me like a miniature black particles flowing in that smoke. And then those particles would form patterns. And that's what I saw when I asked him, what is genic technology? They seem to have a way of arranging their own inner composition, which allows them to live longer than we do. Which raises an interesting question, could human do the same thing? I mean, yes, we have physical bodies, so it's more difficult, but physicality is only denser version of spiritual energy. And I never, absolutely never understood what I saw because it raises so many questions. If Paimon is mortal, then obviously a lot of his actions make sense. Because here is the thing, we as humans are fundamentally, from a perspective of somebody who is like 15,000 years old or whatever, we are dumb. It doesn't matter which potential we have. In a current state, we are retarded. We are in a state of willing retardation. And so, why would you waste your time with intellectual and spiritual retards, which are actually more powerful than you, but they chose to be retarded? Why would you waste your time with them unless you have to deal? Because he, on multiple occasions, he specifically told me that he is annoyed with humanity's stupidity. And when I asked him, explain me the reason for it, he was like, he would show me a model of a man. And then within that model was like an infinite light. And that light was infinite in magnitude and amounts. But it had like layers of energy around it. And so our energy bodies are nothing more than layers around that spark. They are fundamentally just like a shell. They are the shell of the spark. The only thing which is actually relevant and which makes sense is the spark, which would mean that we already possess infinite amount of energy, which we simply don't utilize. And then he kind of explained to me that essentially humanity is created with perfected version of divine spark. So all of the spirits we summon, they have sparks, but those sparks are, let's put it bluntly, they are in a more primitive state. So we are essentially, according to King Paimon, this is not what I made up, we are essentially one level above spirits we summon, most of them at least. And so if that's the case, then it's completely logical for them to occasionally feed off us. Because what would humanity do if somebody created a more advanced version of life and put it on our planet? We would obviously see that more advanced version as something we shouldn't submit to, obviously. We should try to imitate them and to take stuff from them so we become like them and more perfect by them. And that's essentially what the gene are doing, because remember, it's all about creating geno-human hybrids. It's all about that.
Well, and when we talk about like the genome, and we have really unique DNA, we have recombinant DNA, and it can be infused with other layers of things that can affect the actual DNA strand. And when we work with these spirits, it's like a gateway of energy that infuses into our own DNA. And the only reason that we age physically, you know, is because our cells break down. Okay, why do our cells break down? Because if we could keep our cells from breaking down, theoretically, we could have physical immortality. When a cell breaks down, it's because like the telomeres on the ends of like the cells, the DNA unravel, they break down. So if we could stop the telomeres from breaking down, in theory, we could have physical immortality. Um, it's harder to achieve that on some levels because there are so many things, from our lifestyle choices, from our environment, from, different factors cause the telomeres to unravel, faster. And so that's why, some people appear to age faster because of these external factors. Um, if we could control that, we could definitely have more control over the aging process and the decay process when it comes to our physical bodies. As an energetic spiritual being, our physical bodies are just like a host. And, if jinn are not necessarily immortal, but they can lengthen their existence by, feeding off of whatever they can feed off of. We can learn to do the same. You know, we have a responsibility to try to steer and steward our physical vessels to try to, the goal is to live as long as we can usually. Um, but I think that, when we can tap into like some spiritual things that can help us out, we can slow that process by being, mindful of things that we do to ourselves. I mean, there's things that you can do to mitigate the damage that we do to our own bodies, certainly. But by nature, humans are a destructive species. We destroy things, we destroy planets, we destroy our bodies, we destroy things. Some of it is our own doing, and some of it is just a natural process, that gets accelerated with environmental and dietary factors. Um, but I think that we're getting closer to prolonging our physical lives, through several different means, whether it's just understanding other healing modalities or, um, you know, human machine type of hybrids. You can enhance abilities with different things. I mean, transhumanism in some ways is definitely been an interesting topic of discussion the last few years, especially. So it'll be interesting to kind of see where our species is going as a whole, because we're not the end destination. We're kind of a bridge to the next step. And, people that are aware of this and willing to keep up and navigate that, I think will be the ones that will be kind of the new humans, as opposed to people that are just still kind of mentally, spiritually, energetically asleep to it.
Well, essentially, there's one thing spirits want me to say in this interview. I am like getting flashback of me needing to say this. So I said in this interview that division between angels and demons is artificial, that they are two different polarities of the same spectrum. But there is one thing I need to add to that. From a point of human divine spark, they are two different ends of the same spectrum. Okay. So you as a human divine spark, you can work with both and it will operate because you will simply cover the entire spectrum. So there is no need to limit yourself to one part of the spectrum, right? But from the genic perspective, since majority of them are inclined towards black light, there are white light oriented genes, but they are rare. They are less numerous. and they are not summonable to majority of magicians. You need to be a form of a ascetic to work with them. You really need to cultivate your body of white light. And there is one specific thing black light agents wanted me to say, and I will. So from the higher planes, this plane and all the planes jinn inhabit is bombarded by white life force energy. And to majority of beings in existence, that life force energy is beneficial. But to the jinn specifically, that life force energy is actually detrimental because they vibrate on a frequency of black light. So it creates like a weird reaction between those two ends of the spectrum. This is one of the reasons why majority of shayateen specifically have aggression towards humans, because we have the same light as that white light. But also one of the ways to aid genic agenda is to quote unquote weaken the celestial radiance. So create some form of black vortexes which will siphon the light in so that the jinn can transform it into something which they can take, and also it will weaken the detrimental radiance of white light to them. And this is something which specifically Maridic tribe of the jinn, which are like the most reclusive and claustrophobic jinn, told me that out of all of the things human can do to them, this is the only thing which can actually help them. What I kind of noticed as a really weird phenomena is specifically, for example, if you call the Shayateen up, or if you call ghouls up, or any other jinnic tribe, and ask them what you should do for them, they'll tell you something. Give me this or give me that, or do this or do that, and then we can make a deal. But with marriage specifically, if you ask them what you can do to them, they will almost take it as an offense because they consider themselves so much above you as a human that they will take as an offense if you tell them what I can do for you. And they literally told me that the only thing you can do for us is to weaken the radiance. Anything else you do for us is absolutely irrelevant to us.
I didn't hear that last
And
part.
if
What
you
did you say that, what is the best thing that we can do according to what that insight was? I couldn't hear the last couple sentences.
so essentially, I was told, you know, that division of rebellious jinn on ghouls, marids, ifrits, and Scylla jinn. So essentially, the marids are related to ocean, and they are essentially claustrophobic and really reclusive. They don't reply to calls when you call them. I managed to call them after years of working between Paimon. I figured out how to call them actually. And when I called them, they told me that the only thing we as humans can do for them is to weaken the celestial radiance. And I explained what that radiance is before. So essentially, only when you do the rites to weaken the celestial radiance, you can like contact the marids and work with them effectively without being ignored, because they will essentially ignore you. But this type of operation is something all of the darker gens would appreciate and require. This is the only thing we can really do, which can objectively and factually help them. Because all other things we do essentially is like giving the toys to the child. Okay, they love our offerings of life force, but it's something they take for fun or short profit. It's not something which helps them long term. And so this is the only thing for my knowledge, which can be wrong by the way, uh, which we can do for them.
Well, I find that, in my space, when we're talking about like lights and frequencies and things, I am very much, I have different colored lights in my space. I have red lights, I have blue lights, I have black lights. I kind of like the more blue end of the spectrum, the deep, dark blue end of the spectrum, to where it's like black light. It's like behind me. You know, I like this darker blue light. And so I kind of keep that light spectrum on 24/7 in my space. It's always on. And when it comes to, you know, actions which, decrease kind of the perceived celestial types of lights, anything, that's going against like the structure of the hierarchy, breaking the chains of dogmatic bondage, anytime that we're doing those things, that is, you know, translated to light as well. It's being able to break those bonds, break those chains, let the other energies flow more readily into this world with us as kind of like a nexus point from which that they may flow, through us, through our space, through our will, through our working. Um, I find that if we, keep ourselves and our spaces conducive to these kinds of spirits, then they do come more readily.
I agree. So, what are your methods for keeping the space more conducive to them? What do you usually do?
I mean, for me, I have lots of things that, resonate with that energy. I mean, it's funny because when I first started in magic and witchcraft, I had a lot of more, wood and shells and rocks and stones, all over my altar. When I started working with more the demonic and I went out shopping for new magical implements, I was really surprised that they were leaning more towards like brass, bronze, silver, gold, more metallic things upon my altar. And I fought him on it at first. I was like, no, I want more natural things. It's a witchy altar. No, bitch, this is a more demonic altar. We need things that conduct more electricity and energy, was kind of the reply that I got. And with gin, I mean, historically, yes, a lot of brass and bronze was used in the rituals, and a lot of my altar space, my altar will change kind of depending on what type of working I'm doing. But in my room, in my magical space, I have a lot of things that resonate and can hold and transmit a lot of energy. I have gold and silver and brass and bronze. I have blue lights. Um, I have black lights, blue lights that resonate, you know, on those spectrums. Um, and just, my connection with the abyss. I also have a giant 4-foot round scrying mirror. Maybe in one of our next podcasts, I'll kind of angle the camera around and you'll be able to see it behind me, but it's up on the wall and it's a giant scrying mirror. And I always have flames going. I always have something just kind of picking up the energy of this space. And I find that, working with gin and infernals, a lot of people do like, when they'll open a ritual, they'll open it and then they'll like banish energy. I don't banish energy. Uh-uh. I like the energy that I call, so I want it to accumulate in my space. So my space resonates, with forces that I don't banish, because I understand that when I'm done with the rite, the spirits are going about their business. So they're already kind of withdrawing somewhat from the space, but they leave a signature behind that I find conducive to all kinds of things. Some people may not like that kind of energy. So if you're not inclined to resonate with that energy, okay, fine, you might want to do a little spiritual sweeping after a ritual. But I really love the energies of the abyss, infernal energies, and so I just let that infuse everything in my space 24/7.
Okay, so there is also one interesting note I received. This is like fall deeply into territory of unverified personal gnosis, which is partially backed by external material. But I kind of noticed that not all Jinn are equally dark. They don't have all equal amounts of black light. And I asked one of them, one really powerful Jinn, which is famous, relatively famous in the literature, Sidi Maimun, which is literally translation is the holy lucky one, the traditional drinking of Saturn. And I asked him like, what is this? Why I summon somebody and he's like almost friendly to human aura, and then I summon somebody else who is like destroying everything without any intention. He is simply existing and burning everything down. And then I kind of received another piece of information, which is to study the names of Allah. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, aren't you against all of this? And then, like, Paimon goes on a long tractate about how Allah, aka God, is actually the supreme spiral, right? The source of everything, and how the names are actually the aspects of the spiral. So when you pronounce those names, you are not calling any entity. You are getting into contact with certain energies, right? And that's essentially what's the guy's name? My brain blocked. But that's essentially what Albuni meant in his work, that you pronounce those names and then you create certain energy frequency, which does what you want. And this is how talismans work with certain names carved on. So then he goes into explanation that every name is essentially energetically balanced. Every single divine name is a balanced polarity between positive and negative aspects of that energy current. But if you emphasize that you are calling the left side of the particular name, you are essentially calling the black light in pure form. So he was like, try to pray to the left side of divine names. And so you list the names and you state, I pray to the left side of this name, and left side of this name, and left side of this name. And so black light starts descending. And I start absorbing it, and my aura starts to shake from shock. And then my moon appears and says, look, you should stop this. And I am like, why? The reason why you should stop this and why nobody else is doing this is because this literally can rip your soul apart. So make your energy so overloaded that it rips apart. You cease to exist. And this is meant by the sentence which claims, whoever is not written in the book of life will be destroyed. What it means is if you accumulate too much negative energy and black light, the soul will collapse in itself, and there will be no reincarnation, no rebirth, no afterlife. It will cease to exist. It will be like a black hole when you deprive it of fuel. And then I asked the spirit, well, why jinn are not like all equally dark? And he was like, there are certain regulations. Now, I don't know, did he use the word laws or regulations? I am not sure, but he was like, there are certain laws or regulations preventing certain genic entities from venerating the left side of the names. And it's actually forbidden in their realm to venerate pure black light. What I mean by the term venerate is it's not a classical worship. They don't have a classical religions as we do, cause it for it. What is meant by their definition of venerate is connect to. So jinn, majority of jinn are actually forbidden to connect to the pure black light because the higher ranking spiritual energies don't want their own spiritual produce or associated spiritual energies to destroy themselves. So even jinn themselves don't mess with black light often. And so if we really want to work with them, we need to study black light. But we also need to understand that the black light is so destructive that even at the other side of the whale, it's not studied by all energies. It's not studied by everyone. It's essentially something which they discourage. And that's why the black light is not written about. because it literally, when I experimented with that, it almost killed me as an individual. What it also does is it empowers your Karen too much. So Karen, aka your genic twin, absorbs the black light and he starts going crazy and going rampage, which breaks your psyche apart. Because Karens are essentially designed to do three things. They are designed to test us, they are designed to protect us from harm, and they are designed to teach us dark arts. So those are three tasks of the Karen. Well, when you overfeed the Karen, if you give it too much energy, he will protect you from physical harm so you will not die until your body runs out. But he will go too hard on a testing part. So all of a sudden, your life will start to collapse and you will have weird nightmares and somebody will grab you, create you panic attacks, etc. Uh, and so, like, I should be like really trying to explain to people how all of this is extremely difficult and it shouldn't be messed around with.
I find that, interesting thing happens when you introduce different lights, both physically and spiritually into your space. I would say, like the blue lights that I use, I mean, I went to Walmart and I got like the LED spotlights, not the ones that already have like a colored filter, that it's just like a white light going through a filter. No, you want like the true colors of the LEDs themselves. So, the light, the plastic over the top will look like clear or like an opaque white, but it will glow blue because it's like that's the frequency. So you want the frequency lights that glow, to bring that physical light in, into your space. I find that, I call it like moon bathing. I'll fill my whole room with these blue lights and I'll just like sit in the middle of it and just bathe in it. And I find that I'll do that sometimes before bed and then I'll have really intense dreams. I also have red light, so I have the other end of the spectrum to kind of balance it out, um, as well. So I have red lights and blue lights to kind of, go both ends of the spectrum. Um, And I find it just, physically it's interesting. I know a lot of people say that like, okay, if you have electronics in your room, it emits kind of the bluer end of the spectrum that can disrupt your sleep patterns. You know, that may be true at first, but then you reach a threshold. And now I'm more comfortable sleeping with my blue lights on. Um, I usually don't have one like right over my bed. I'll have it like next, filtered through fabric. So it's diffused a bit. But I love just having these colors and lights in my space because, aesthetically, I think it looks nice, but just energetically, it feels a certain way to me. And it's really conducive for the kinds of magic that I do. But I noticed that, you'll see things differently. It's like when you have a room filled with blue light, which is closer to black light, these are not true black lights behind me. Because the black lights, when you blind the black light bulbs, they don't usually they won't light up the whole room. It's usually just kind of limited to like a space, a few inches to maybe a few feet from the bulb. These blue lights are the closest to black light you'll get, but they will still illuminate things. Anything white will really pop out. And I've noticed that, you can see things on your skin that you can't see under regular lights. If you walk under the blue light, you'll see your veins will stand out more. You can see like little like kind of like nerve pathways. You'll start to see things through your skin with the lights, physically. But, spiritually, when you're playing with light and you understand like the spiritual implications of like these different frequencies of light, it's just kind of interesting what it will infuse into your life.
Yeah.
So play with light,
Like
people.
for the end of this, yeah, yeah. But for the end of this podcast, I would like you to share like some weird anecdote from your rituals with Jen. Uh, what's your experience with the police?
Oh, with Ibliss. Um, you know, I just would say that sometimes I've been frustrated because there were times when, Like when I do ritual and evoke spirits, they always come. Sometimes with Jen, I've had the sense that I didn't get like a really full sense of their spiritual essence in my chamber. I just, try as I might, I'm like, okay, what's wrong here? Did I, and then I realized, okay, it's not really about like the offering. It's just my perception perhaps, or understanding that I was overthinking it. I was overthinking the whole thing. I was like, look, because I was expecting them to, show up and really fill my space with their presence, and that was not the case. And with Ibliss, I'll get a sense of him sometimes, but other times it's like a meeting of minds. It's like his consciousness will touch mine, and then he's immediately gone. I'm like, well, shit, did I not do this right? No, I did it right, but these are creatures of action. He went immediately to work. So it's like if you blink once, you'll miss them, you know? So that can be a little bit frustrating. It's a little bit different than how I usually have evocations go. But with Jinn, they seem to get right to work. They don't want to stay in chat a lot, you know? They tend to get right to work, like almost annoyed if I try to slow them down and talk to them, you know? It's more like, we know what needs to be done, just get the fuck out the way and let me do it type of energy coming from them. And it's not so much in words. I don't often communicate in words with Jen. It's more just feeling their essence and the intent and then letting it go to work.
Yeah. But like one last question. This is like maybe a personal question. I don't know. Where you found those magnificent brass lamps you use in your rites? Because like they are really magnificent. Where you
Well,
bought
thank
them?
you. I find things like everywhere. A lot of times I'll find little treasures at the thrift store. Go to Goodwill. I very rarely order anything online. I love antique stores, Goodwill, secondhand shops, wherever you can find little knickknacks. Sometimes I'll just be browsing through the shelves at these places and I'll see something that catches my eye and I don't even know what I'm going to use it for, but I know that I have to have it. And so I'll buy it and it'll sit on my shelf until all of a sudden I'll get, the purpose of it will be made known either by just my own inspiration or the spirits will say, okay, now you need this for this. I found a lot of my candelabras at Goodwill. I found a lot of things like that. So I love shopping, I love bargains. I love secondhand shopping. I love, you know, I love antique stores. So you can kind of find them anywhere. I mean, if you want more traditional means of shopping, of course, there's Amazon and eBay, and you can like specifically look for different kinds of candelabras and lamps and jars and things. But I always like to put my hands on them before I buy them. So I like to just go to the local like secondhand stores and things will come through and it's different inventory every day. So sometimes it may be a while before I find what I want, but eventually it'll come to me if it's something that I need. Eventually, it will be put in my path, and it'll be at a price that is, good for my budget, and I'll find it and I'll buy it. Um, I've also given away a lot of, ritual implements to friends, other magical people. I've gifted people with some of my previous candelabras from some of my previous altar pictures. I've given away a lot of things. Um, but things kind of come and go and my ritual space kind of evolves as I do and um I'm always on the lookout for new things. So it's just when I'm out and about and I see something, then I'll usually find an interesting use for it.
Yeah, so one last question for the end
Okay.
is what instances do you use to call the gen from the uncle's fire specifically? Is there any instances there they prefer?
Well, I find that copal resin is like a good incense for any kind of spirit. Seems to be copal incense is really good because it gives a good smoke without it being really raspy. Um, it creates a lot of smoke, and I like resins more than like stick or cone. I mean, I'll use stick and cone for other things, but for gin, I like the resin because I like to burn the coal in the brazier, and I like to sprinkle copal because it creates a lot of smoke. Um, you know, Sometimes again, dragon's blood or frankincense and myrrh. Or sometimes I'll just blend herbs together, whatever I feel is appropriate to the rite. I'll just kind of you know, we have a local metaphysical shop that is well stocked in like loose leaf herbs. And so I'll just find things and mix them together and throw them on the coals as well, if it makes sense to do so. But a good standby is always, you know, copal. Seems to be kind of a universally good incense for most things.
Yeah.
I
So
use it for almost everything.
yeah, so this was like a really good podcast, and we really drove the point home. And the point was the jinn are quick, the jinn are effective, the jinn are powerful, especially the shayateen, but those are wild animals. And please use the word of caution. And thank you for being honest, elegant, and informative in this interview. We will probably have part three sometimes in the future. We will see what will subject matter be, but Joseph was like stuck in traffic. So
I know. I wish you could have been here, but hopefully we'll all be able to come together next time as well. I really enjoy coming on. It's been fun. Thank you so much for having me on. Just
yeah,
freeze again.
thank you for that. But yeah, this was amazing. And talk to you in part three. So let me stop the recording. Thank you for watching, guys, and see you tomorrow.
Thank you.